We're talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart today, in that I have the privilege of working with these state officials across the country who, over the last 3 years, have been fighting back against the climate hoax happening in America, and pushing back against investment players like BlackRock, where they've collectively divested about $13 billion from BlackRock, from their state pension funds and other public investments. So it's an honor to be here, an honor to moderate. Yeah, you can clap for that. 13 billion is still a lot of money. It's small to BlackRock, but we're getting noticed and we're getting their attention and we're starting to make change, which is the goal. So with that, you've already heard about our speakers. So I want to start with Representative Dye. I'm going to give each of them just a couple minutes to do a little introduction remark.
Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's such an honor to be speaking in front of such a great, esteemed group of people, and it's just amazing to be here. I've spent 30 years on and off a tractor cab thinking about things, and I just thank you, Jennifer, for giving me the opportunity to have a platform and just tell you what I've been thinking. And I hope it brings a unique perspective to this discussion about energy policy. My life mission has been to advocate for a broader understanding of our farmers, the farm families, and the rural communities that are deeply connected to them. I intend to make the case that the renewable energy transformation is currently framed under a cultural zeitgeist, and it's completely incompatible with our culture in farming, and it poses an existential threat to our food system. Farm families and their rural communities are facing transformational changes, and those challenges are being imposed on them through the state energy policies in Washington State, globalists that are imposing these policies from above, and they are ill-prepared to confront these threats. And this is what really drives me. It drives me hard. We're at the precipice of losing this vital culture forever, as decent people are forced to yield to these overwhelming pressures. And these energy policies are threatening to destroy the very societal gifts that they provide. Today, we're witnessing the struggle between two divergent paradigms that baseline our economic and social systems. On the one hand, we have self-employed farming, family-owned farms, and despite the slur of corporate farms, we are self-employed entrepreneurs, and we earn and capitalize sustainability through investments made from sweat and determination over generations. These uniquely different people hold a deep generational knowledge, and they are uniquely apply that knowledge over time, and that's what sustains our food systems. Without the farmer's instinctive connection to the land and her seasons, the land loses her soul. So today, farmers just make up 1% of the population, and rural voices are being drowned out, and they're leaving their communities disenfranchised. The public is being led to believe that the agricultural systems need reform. And the American farmer is voiceless in this culture war, and their battlefront is the energy transformation. So to combat this, we are forming a new organization called Voices to balance the scales and to give farmers and their families a fighting chance. And we need to protect them because they understand the land and her rhythms deeply, and they steward it from generational knowledge. We're fighting for community re-empowerment, and we're promoting real energy solutions. If nothing else, the agriculture community is expert in efficiency. My husband nurtures 3,800 acres of wheat, and alone he produces enough to feed 125,000 people bread for a year. He does this with roughly 14,000 gallons of diesel, and the sun on the plants convert that to energy, into a caloric energy that feeds people across the world. With hard work, with love and commitment to the land and her gifts, we are essential to sustaining the American ethic of freedom. So with this phenomenal conference, yes.
Yeah, you can clap for that. That's great.
So with this phenomenal conference, I invite you to join me in helping ensure that the voices of those who work the land, voices speaking the wisdom of generations and expressing the essence of our national character, carry loud and carry farm. And in the immortal words of Willard Tweedy, Mrs. Tweedy, I believe the chickens are organizing.
That's great. Yeah. And just a quick reminder, we want to take your questions from the audience. So you have a QR code on your table. I have the magic iPad here, so please start sending us your questions and we'll be able to address any of our panelists here in a minute. Next, Amy Cook, who's a rock star from the State Policy Network, but also is with the founder of Always On Energy Research, which is appropriately named. I love that.
Always On, yes. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Jennifer. And by the way, Jennifer and Rick, you've done a phenomenal job on this. Right?
Yeah.
Like literally. I did tell the story about how one of my first times speaking at Steamboat, or with sort of the organization that is the Steamboat Institute. It was the back room of a bar, and it was a barbecue spot, I think. It was in Steamboat. There were about 40 people. It was a good turnout. But so Jennifer and Rick have done a phenomenal job, and I'm thrilled to be back. So I have to start with this. My least favorite phrase, and if there's anything that makes me want to just pick up whatever is close by that is heavy and throw it at either a computer screen or the television, it's energy transition. There is no transition. It's a forced march off a cliff. This transition is to unaffordable, unreliable power. And I think if all of us have, had the ability to actually vote on, do you want the forced march to unreliable, unaffordable power, we'd all probably vote no. So when somebody tells you there's an energy transition, or you read it in the newspaper, throw the BS flag. It is not. It is a handful of special interests that are telling you, you need to give up your way of life and rely upon unreliable, intermittent, weather-dependent wind and solar and batteries. So what we do at Always On Energy Research, AOER for short, or Always On, we have a quote on our website, and it's a famous quote, so I'm sure you all know it. In God we trust, all others must bring data. So we bring the data to the fight. We fill the information gap. And we look at specifically, we'll look at national regulations, we'll take national regulations, we'll take state energy policies, and then we model it in two ways. We'll model for cost, and we'll model it for reliability. And I hate to say this, there are a number of states, and of course at the federal level, they're getting it wrong, so expect more rolling blackouts. We don't want to be Texas, but apparently some states are trying very hard to get there. You all might remember what happened with Winter Storm Uri. So we fill that information gap, and we fill it with proprietary modeling, where we do it on cost and reliability. We'll take a federal regulation and look at what the impact will be on a regional transmission organization or on a state. We'll look at your state implementation plans, or we'll look at your state energy policies. We'll even look at local energy policies, and we'll see what the impact is going to be on your pocketbooks for every single ratepayer. And then, will you have enough power to actually power your economy for human flourishing in the future? And I hate to say it, but there are a lot of states that are coming up short. That being said, some are doing a really good job. Others are doing a terrible, terrible job. And we'll get into that later, but Always On Energy Research. And we bring the data to the fight.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. Next up, the Honorable Jason Isaac. CEO of the American Energy Institute, and my favorite title for him is the Carbon King. I see that he's just opened his can of carbon.
Yes, I did. I just ingested higher concentrations of CO2 than what's in the atmosphere, and I assure you those in the front row, you're fine. I'm not going to spontaneously combust. The left wants you to believe that I'm actually drinking carbon pollution. This is what they're calling it. They're talking about CO2, this trace gas in the atmosphere. It's 0.04% of our atmosphere. It is necessary to produce wheat, to feed people. Our deserts are greening right now around the world because we are increasing CO2 emissions that's being driven by the warming. So CO2 emissions don't increase warming. It's the warming that increases CO2 emissions, and that's being driven by the sun. I know Bill Gates wants to block that out with some kind of mirrors that he wants to put in the atmosphere. Oh, Lord, please help us that doesn't happen. But seriously, when you get into some of these environmental, climate, alarmist goals, everything comes down to CO2. The energy transition is based on decarbonization, a low-emission future. We're nowhere near an energy transition. We are near an energy expansion. And we need to continue. And when people talk about energy transition, I'm like, oh, you're talking about transitioning the 3.5 billion people off of burning animal dung and coal and getting them onto propane around the world to lift them out of poverty, because energy is the key to eliminating poverty, and we produce that energy here more responsibly than anywhere else in the planet.
I should also add that Jason's replacement in the state legislature is here. His bride, Representative Carrie Isaac. Where's she at?
Yes.
So Carrie.
Yeah. It was Congressman Raskin, the lovely liberal from Maryland, that referred to me as a carbon king when I testified in front of Congress, and I took a sip of a carbonated drink, and I said, I'm Jason Isaac, and I live a high carbon lifestyle.
That's right.
And I think the rest of the world should too. And that's when the left's heads exploded. I wish it was more literally than figuratively. But he did. He called me a carbon king. And that was the only notes I took from a 4-hour testimony. And I'm like, when the left calls you name, whether it's Ultra MAGA or Neanderthal, embrace it. And I did. I got Carbon King. It's on my business card. It's on my wallet. I've got my high carbon-based life family on one side, Carbon King on the other. My wife made me a great Halloween costume last year. We went as the Carbon King and Queen. But we do. You look at places that live a high carbon lifestyle, that have high CO2 emissions per capita, and that's where you have economic prosperity. It's also where you have environmental leadership. The places that have the cleanest air in the world, like the United States. The places that have access to the cleanest water on the planet, like the United States, have high CO2 emissions. And so in 2019, I was making all these trips with energy producers, and we were going back and forth to Washington, D.C. from Texas. And I was traveling with energy producers, and we're going to the White House, and we're meeting with the Trump administration and recommending policy and messaging and research. And it was a very humbling experience to get to do that. But what some of the energy producers were telling me is that banks and financial institutions weren't investing in oil and gas anymore. And I started to do research on this. I just started with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I just left the legislature. And one of them just pretty much bluntly said, Jason, you've got to fix this. And I accepted the challenge. And I picked a fight with Goliath, but I didn't know it was Goliath at the time. I thought I was just fighting for American prosperity. And I had no idea who the behemoth was that I was fighting, but there's nothing more than I love it when a self-righteous coastal elite person tells me what's best for me and how to live my life. And when Larry Fink says that he's going to use the boardroom to force behaviors, and he's using my tax dollars and pension dollars and 401k investment dollars for people like teachers and firefighters and first responders and county and state municipal employees, using their money to force behaviors in the boardroom, I can play that game. And so in 2020, I started writing a piece of policy that ultimately became law in Texas. It was the first bill to pass in the country that says if you boycott fossil fuels, you're no longer welcome to do business with the state of Texas. First state in the nation to pass the bill. Since then, 4 other states passed the almost identical model policy. They're being challenged in court, but we know we're going to win. Those are good model policies. And today, earlier this year, BlackRock, because I like when I get to force behaviors of bureaucrats with policy, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to uphold law. And our State Board of Education that oversees our Permanent School Foundation fund of $53 billion divested $8.5 billion from BlackRock.
Yeah.
Huge win.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I've got a whole lot more, but the numbers were there that shows that the energy industry was being divested. Specifically, oil and gas and coal in North America was being targeted. We're pushing back, and that's a good thing. And then in 2023, we were the first state, Texas was the first state again, to pass a piece of policy that said insurance companies can't consider ESG factors, this environmental, social, and governance, or as I like to call it, everyone's suffering guaranteed. They were pushing, they can no longer consider ESG factors in their rate making. They have to consider things like risk. And it's a fascinating story because this was the last piece of legislation that passed. We have strict deadlines in Texas, and the deadline was up one night for midnight. And this was the last bill that passed at 11:58. And like at 1:30 in the morning, my wife comes home and I'm visiting with her. I'm like, that bill passed. And she tells me the story. She had forced a parliamentary maneuver at 11:52 p.m. to call the previous question, to stop debate because the Democrats were trying to kill this bill. She single-handedly passed the bill and has her name nowhere on it at 11:58. Again, the first state in the nation pushing back against these woke insurance companies that are discriminating against Americans that support American energy.
That's great. Well, let's stick on Texas for a minute. And I know, Amy, you'll have some thoughts on this too. But with Uri and Beryl, who have been noteworthy storms recently, and by the way, Jennifer, your audience is very well educated on some of these. I'm watching the questions come in. Someone just pointed out that Larry Fink has 2 private jets. So I think that excludes him from being able to talk about climate change. With all due respect, if you flew here at a private jet, you probably are now on the front line talking about climate change. So that's good. But Larry Fink showed up, somebody else pointed out, in Texas with one of your statewide officials to talk about the energy solutions that Texas needs. How's that going?
Not well. So we had Winter Storm Uri in 2021, happened in February. Over 700 people lost their lives because our Texas energy grid, because of market distortions primarily from the federal government, the production tax credit. Solar gets over $80 a megawatt hour. That's essentially 8 cents. The average cost for electricity in Texas is 13 cents a kilowatt hour. So solar has this huge advantage that they get 8 cents on top of that. Wind is about 2.5 cents or $25 a megawatt hour. And if the wind's blowing, whether the electricity is being put on the grid or not, they're getting that credit. That's our tax dollars that are being given to them. And it's distorted our market. At the time of this Winter Storm Uri, it was 33% of our grid. And the left came out and they blamed natural gas. They said that wind and solar were meeting expectations. 1.5% of their installed capacity. That's pretty low grade. I would not certainly praise my kids for getting a 1.5 out of 100 on any kind of test. But they were meeting expectations, and people are like, oh, you can't blame wind and solar. I'm like, you're right, you can't blame them. They didn't show up. They weren't there. But people lost their lives because our grid has become too dependent on variable alternative forms of electric generation. And unfortunately, the policy, the market reform hasn't been done in Texas. We're still continuing to push and we're driving this, but now we're at over 40% of our grid installed is variable alternative forms of electric generation. So the legislature, in my opinion, did a really stupid thing last legislative session, passed subsidies for quick start natural gas. This is what California is doing. California is building quick start natural gas with taxpayer dollars. So they're taking money out of multiple pockets now to make sure that the lights stay on. But all we're doing is paying more. Electricity costs are up 25% because of alternative, variable, unreliable, Chinese-made renewable energy, and it's crushing us. So our lieutenant governor invited BlackRock. I was shocked to Texas. It was so funny because it was like 3 weeks before the $8.5 billion divestment came out, and I'm like, hey, come to Texas and leave your wallet. Because that's what happened. That's what our Permanent School Foundation did. It was awesome. But of course, BlackRock, they can't do business with the state of Texas, so they're not going to get these subsidies. But other companies are going to come in, and it's just appalling that we're having to chase subsidies with subsidies. And that's one of the reasons why I started the American Energy Institute. We're a new trade organization that represents American energy producers that support free markets, that aren't feeding the crocodiles hoping they'll be the last ones eaten. As I say at the American Energy Institute, we don't feed the crocodiles, we wear them. And I'll be wearing my boots later tonight. But it's just we don't capitulate on those things. In every other trade organization that I researched that supports companies in energy, They're embracing ESG, they're embracing DEI, they're embracing decarbonization, they're just feeding the crocodiles. And so it's fun to get to work with people that are in the energy side of things that actually are okay with me advocating for policies that would reduce the cost of energy, reduce the cost of a barrel of oil. You won't see many of the majors do that. You won't see trade organizations do that, but we understand and make the connection to human flourishing and affordable and reliable energy. And we need more of that in Texas. And so we're going to keep the fight up in Texas because we fuel the rest of the country. And if we don't have the power to power that industry, then we're going to look at deindustrialization like Germany and the United Kingdom are facing, all to the benefit of China, who is now exporting energy for the first time ever, sending $5 billion a year to Iran, or a month, I'm sorry, to Iran for oil, that they're now refining into diesel, jet fuel, and home heating oil and exporting it.
So Amy, you may or may not agree that Texas is one of the bad examples. Maybe you do. I'd love to hear your perspective on what are some states that are doing it right, and then who are a couple states that maybe notably are in really bad shape?
Yeah. So I actually have a couple of slides, and do you mind if I go? I'm going to
sure.
show them real quick. I could have done them there, I didn't realize, but I think I can do it from up here, right? And it is at the big green button. Oh, there we go. So, all right. That's us. Always on energy research, In God we trust, all others bring data. All right, so big green button. There we go. Okay, so this one. So Tim Walz is our new vice presidential candidate. And by the way, the two guys that I work with, they go by the Energy Bad Boys on Substack. They spent the last 6 years in Minnesota dissecting everything that Tim Walz did on energy and environmental policy. So if you look at this, and by the way, it made him a hot commodity for news talk over the last week, 10 days. But if you look at this, so this is what they did in Minnesota. Walz wants 100% carbon-free. Now here's the thing, they do have a little bit of nuclear, although they've put a moratorium on building any new nuclear. Look at this, what do they always tell you? Wind and solar are free, right? It's free, so you're saving money. If you look at this, Minnesota, new solar, $471 per megawatt hour. New wind, $272. You look at what the existing costs. They want to shut down existing cost at 30, let's call it $40, the coal, at $40 a megawatt hour. Now compare that to 471. And the reason why it's so high is what they tell you, okay, wind and solar are free. Problem is it's really expensive to turn it on, to turn it into electricity that's actually usable, and you have to massively overbuild, you have to build new transmission lines, and it needs batteries. So they don't tell you all of that part. Yes, wind and solar, they're free, but they show up when they feel like it, right? And I'll tell you what, if you have a blackout, or you need power overnight, when it shows up as expected, that means solar isn't there. So this is what we do, and this is what the guys did for 6 years with Tim Walz. And so we've blasted this out everywhere. We call it the Green New Walz. Let's see if I... this is one of my favorites. Did you guys know, so EPA puts out these ridiculous regulations. The new carbon plan, right? There's the new carbon plan 2.0, Clean Power Plan 2.0. Do you see all that red in there on that chart? Yeah. That's all the times in the Southwest Power Pool. And I bring that up because it's a regional transmission organization that encompasses a number of states. All that red in there, those are times at which the Southwest Power Pool won't have enough supply to meet demand. Yeah, that's what we call rolling blackouts. And that's to save the grid. The thing is, this is the EPA, and this is what we model. This is the kind of stuff we model. EPA, when they put out one of these plans, they'll say they model for adequacy. So on paper, it looks good. What they don't model for is reliability. Two different things. Yeah, I have an adequate supply. Look, I've got plenty of wind, solar, and batteries, but you don't have a reliable supply. So we model for reliability, and that's what that is. What states don't realize oftentimes is they actually have an enormous amount of authority when it comes to their generating portfolio. That was the sort of grand bargain of the power plan of 1935. States can decide how they want to power their state. So if you're a state that wants to go off a cliff, go, I guess. I mean, it's up to your residents to vote you down and say no. But states should be the one deciding how they want to power themselves, how they want to have human flourishing. Next, okay, all right, since we're in Colorado, a friend from Texas said Colorado may be the worst positioned state in the country. And that's because we have no nuclear and the legislature is openly hostile to it. And the state wants 100% electrification, not just of the grid, but also of transportation and home heating. What is that going to cost? Well, I put it up here. All of that together is almost just shy of $700 billion, that's billion with a B, $700 billion through 2050. Here's another one. I won't read this whole thing to you, but there's this one. Colorado electricity consumers can expect bills that will peak at an average of just shy of $1,300. That's per month. $1,300 utility bills because they're accelerating depreciation, then they have to rapidly build out, and that includes transmission lines. Just so you know, the governor of Colorado finally admitted that wind, solar, and batteries are the most expensive way to decarbonize, but you didn't hear about it because they buried the report. And they didn't include transmission lines, but you know what they're doing now? In Colorado, HICPUF which is Department of Health and Public Financing. It's the Health and Environmental Financing. HICPUF is giving out free big giant battery packs to Medicare and Medicaid patients who need it to support medical devices. They acknowledge that we don't have reliable power, but they won't change the policy. Listen, states like Colorado, they're resource rich, they're policy bankrupt. Yeah. All right. With all of that spending, Colorado, 25 hours of blackouts, just expect it. States that are doing it right, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Utah is the gold standards. And I won't go through each of them. I will say this. There are two different ways that states are looking at it. One are the states that are doing the climate fear mongering. Colorado's one of them. Minnesota's another one of them. States that are putting their people first, they're putting reliability and affordability. That comes first. Human flourishing is first. Kentucky, North Carolina. The gold standard really is Utah because they didn't just put it into policy, they put out an entire framework that will allow that state to sustain their affordable, reliable power grid. So what I suggest people do, if you live on the western slope, get a giant extension cord, throw it over the Utah line, and get yourself plugged into the Utah grid.
Or buy a Generac.
Or wait, yeah, the other one is buy a generator. Sorry.
That's great. Well, we've got about 13 minutes left, and we've got a lot of great questions. Representative Dye, we're going to go to you next because this question has come up a few times. Why is it such a problem for farmers to lease their land to renewable energy companies? You want to talk a little bit about that as a farmer?
Absolutely. You don't really understand it until you look at it, how these policies play out on an individual basis. So you have this huge power disparity between giant global corporations and the individual farmers that have to negotiate with them. And, farmers are pretty self-reliant. They get into a farm auction where somebody's going out and it's all kind of like a semi-funeral, but you're still bidding up to try and get that piece of equipment and this and that. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but, they think that they can cut a fat hog. And so they're pretty overconfident when they go into these negotiations. And they don't realize that they're dealing with corporations that are, their equity positions are in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And I asked Cordelia when they were negotiating with a group of farmers what their business model was. Was it revenue from the cap and trade with Quebec and California and Washington? And they go, oh, we don't know anything about that. No, it's the subsidies. That's their profit. And they wouldn't be there were it not. And they have so much to offer that they could offer, but they don't. And they take the land lease. They're leasing with farmers for 50-year leases, and that's the developer. And then that sells to these giant equity firms. They did say that the one that they were working with, Tenaska, holds the largest retirement fund in the world for the Canadian country. So that, where does the economic development happen in rural America? But worse, there's the farmers that do and the farmers that don't. And I think that it's really important to understand that some farmers are realizing that this is something bigger, that they are intentionally tearing our farm communities apart. 10 years from now, the entire family farming model could be extinct, and the lands could be owned and operated by these large global equity firms, and the agricultural practices won't have the innovation and the generational memory that preserves the absolute fertility and innovation that creates the miracle of American ag. And so I would say that how does it affect the farmers? We starting to hate each other. We won't talk to each other. We have families that are fighting over the money, the family farmer that stayed on the farm to manage the family's farm, and the kids that want the money, the people that say that they can't make it, the guys that said you're acting just like you're farming, the crop insurance, the idea that if you have that money coming into a farm community, the land loses its farmer, and every farmer that walks off the land is generations of agricultural knowledge that is lost in the ether. And so I think that as America, we need to realize the resource that the American farmer is. The land is nothing without the farmer, not one thing. And if you put Cordelia or Tenaska or Iberdrola or something in control, or worse, like ours, our next door neighbors, our mini billionaire from Boston, and Bill Gates. And so, you put those things on the ground, and they completely change the ag economy. They're speculating on it. Could I go on? Yes, I won't. I'll share some time with my colleagues. But bottom line, I believe it's intentional. I think this is part of the greater plan. I think this is to pull the agriculture farmers, current self-employed, free market, free enterprise, risk takers off of the ground and replace the power structure with power and control through the policymakers and the people that stand to profit handsomely from this transformation. And mark my words, the governor said when he signed his capstone piece that did exactly what you said, that will make power bills in Seattle over $1,000 a month. He called it the revolution 5 times in that speech.
Let's go to this question because it appears a few times in a couple different ways. And I might chime in first, but I think everybody would have the opportunity to answer this. How do we as conservatives do a better job of pulling this environmental issue back? I think several people have expressed, it feels like the left owns this issue. And I think that's partially up until a few years ago true. But I think that there are a lot of great freedom fighters, like the ones on this stage, like women like Jennifer, who had the foresight to put ESG on a panel 2 years ago with Governor Stitt, where people are starting to talk about these issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the ways that we can speak about this issue and how we can win the hearts of kind of normal everyday Americans as conservatives on environmental issues?
Well, I'm happy to chime in on this real quick. I know Jason will have a ton to say, but I'll tell you what, they don't have a monopoly on public health, and they'll try to tell you that they do. But listen, I'll take the whole study of what asthma, kids have asthma. You know what happens if we don't get the energy policy right? People die. Like literally people die. Case in point, Texas. People will die if we don't get it right. I used to laugh about in Weld County days. I'm from Weld County, Colorado, home of probably 26,000 oil wells, 99.9% of which are hydraulically fractured. I'm like, show me the dead kids. Show me the asthma kids. They're just not there. They have claimed this virtue signaling moral superiority, but they don't have a corner on public health. There is no public health without reliable power, period. I mean, we have to be willing to say that immediately and forcefully. Somebody tells me, what about kids with asthma? I go, well, what about people who die in their homes and they die from cold? 55 hours without power in the state of Minnesota in the middle of February or January, people will die, I guarantee you. So one of the things is to not let them get away with this supposed monopoly that they have on public health, because they don't have it, and we should challenge them every single time they try to claim it.
There are two messages that work the best on people that are either in the middle or they're opposed to affordable, reliable energy, primarily from hydrocarbons. And yes, you can use hydrocarbons because the polling shows that 74% of people don't know what hydrocarbons are. So you can use persuasion by confusion. If you're speaking to a right audience, you can talk about fossil fuels, but use hydrocarbons sometimes because it's likely the person that you're talking to doesn't know what you're talking about. And then you can win them and they can be like, heck yeah, we need more hydrocarbons. And they're like, great, you get them from coal. But they're already convinced at that point in time. But the messaging that works, there are two message points. People don't know that we're world leaders in environmental protection in this country, that we've reduced pollution nearly 80% in the last 5 decades. That during the COVID lockdowns, when we take half the cars off the road for 2 months, the air quality in this country didn't improve. And in some cities, it got worse. I wind up doing research on this because someone said it did get a lot better. It didn't. In some cities, it got worse. In some, it got negligible better. But we're in a natural state in this country, and people, especially younger generations, don't know that. They don't know that we're world leaders in clean air. They don't know that we're #1 in access to clean and safe drinking water. And that today, women will spend 200 million hours walking to collect water. Where is the environmental justice for those women that will average over 3 miles, many of them walking by themselves? Bill Gates will give them long-term implantable birth control. He and Melinda fund a program in Ethiopia because they know these women are going to be attacked on their journeys to collect water that they'll then bring back to a hut and heat up with animal dung or biomass. And 3.8 million people will die this year from lung illnesses attributable to indoor air pollution because they don't have access to clean air and clean water. But Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum and the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank and the UN and every other globalist organization won't allow funds to flow into Ethiopia if they're investing in infrastructure that's based on hydrocarbons. And if you know a member of Congress, and I challenge them every time, when do the human rights tribunals begin for these people? Because they are destroying the very people that deserve to be lifted up from out of poverty. The very people that could, and again, we stand over the key to that key to ending poverty right here in Colorado, to lifting the last of the few people out of poverty. And if you look from 1990, 35% of the world's population lived in abject, extreme poverty that's less than $2 a day. And if you ask people today, do you think we've reduced that number, it stayed the same, or got worse? And there are some people out there that over 95% believe it's gotten worse or stayed the same. And until 2020, we were down below 10% of the global population. We were lifting people out of poverty. I blame the shale revolution and energy from this country getting to other countries and lifting them out of poverty. And in the last 3 years, that number started to increase because expensive energy hurts the poor. And we've got an administration in this country and in Europe and around the world that are attacking affordable, reliable energy to the detriment of humanity. And I think that's their goal.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, real quick. We have time for one more question.
So when I was on the candidate Trump, then President-elect Trump's transition team for EPA, here was his challenge, and this is what I love about the optimism, and you can not like his tweets or whatever, but the man was spot on energy and environmental policy. He said it's not either or, it's both. We're Americans, we're the most innovative, most entrepreneurial country. We will do both, and under a Trump administration, we did do both.
Yeah. So the last question Many are asking about nuclear energy. Many are asking about the solution going forward in a state like Colorado, where they're about to potentially lose a coal-fired power plant. I'd say that most of our state officials have a position where they have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. I think you just alluded to that. Can any of you talk a little bit about the issue with nuclear energy? You know, why the left doesn't offer it as a solution?
It's not in the Democrat platform. There's not even mentioned. It's the most dense form of energy on the face of the earth, and I will correct you, Derek, because we're close friends. We don't say all the above, and I use this in a presentation. I show a picture of Gilligan's Island on the bicycle. That's all of the above. And I don't want to get on a bicycle to generate my electricity.
I'm anti-bicycle pedaling
So if someone says they're for all of the above energy policy, know that they're talking about heavily subsidized alternative forms of energy that don't work when we need them to. Use affordable and reliable, because then it's only things that are going to work. And nuclear is affordable and reliable. It won't be built. People won't invest in it until we get rid of the subsidies that are distorting the market, because there's so much sun that comes on during the daylight, especially in Texas, that coal and natural gas have to ramp down. They're running that equipment inefficiently because of the subsidies, and you can't do that with nuclear. Nuclear, you need good base load for it to run full all the time.
So I'll address Colorado real quickly. There are two places in Colorado where we could do a coal to nuclear transition. The whole coal to nuclear, where they retire the existing coal-fired power plant and then put in small modular reactors. One is Pueblo, Comanche 1, 2, and 3. The other one is Craig Power, both of which would, right?
Yeah.
Listen, help both communities immensely. Absolutely, and I will say this, the Independence Institute's one of my clients, at Always On, works with them a lot. We actually did a whole study on this, that Colorado, if it wanted to decarbonize, that the least expensive, most reliable way to do it was through nuclear. And I know that the Independence Institute is working hard to build a pro-nuclear engaged audience. Your biggest problem with it is the governor and then the state legislature. Both the executive mansion and the so it's executive branch, governor's mansion, and the legislature are openly hostile to nuclear. That's where the power has to be. But I will say this: they've done polling in the state. Number one issue is reliability. Number two is affordability. And the state loves nuclear. So it's not the voters. What we need to do is, if you're in Colorado, educate voters on the importance of nuclear. Think about a ballot measure.
Well, thank you. We're out of time.